The wind howled like a wounded thing through the broken bones of the old mission. Caleb Morgan stood alone at the edge of the chapel. Ruins, his boots crunching over fractured stone and bone-dry weeds. The sun had just dropped behind the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, bleeding red across the sky, and already the chill was rolling in off the desert, like a breath from the grave. He didn't believe in ghosts. Not really. But the air here felt wrong. The kind of wrong that made a man check over his shoulder for no reason. The kind of wrong that clung to your clothes. Behind him, the mission stood like a corpse half dug from the earth. Its central tower had long collapsed, but the arched doorway still framed the last light of day, tall, silent, and solemn. From a distance, it looked like a cathedral. Up close, it felt like a tomb. A crow let out a single sharp cry from the rafters above. Then silence. Caleb exhaled slowly. No such thing as cursed land, he told himself. Just old stones and bad memories. But tonight, both felt heavier than usual. 2 days earlier, it had started with a deal too good to be real. $100, said Everett Sinclair, flashing teeth too perfect for the desert. That's what I'm offering, and I'd take half that, if you asked nicely. Caleb raised an eyebrow. That much timber and stone for less than the price of a wagon wheel. Sinclair shrugged, brushing invisible dust from his coat sleeve. The place is worthless. Ghosts and snakes, that's all that's left. Maybe some moldy prayer books. Hell, locals won't even walk past it at night. They were standing on the porch of the general store in Arroyo Viejo, a sun-bleached town nestled between mesas and cattle trails. Sinclair handed Caleb a rolled deed tied with red ribbon. His hands moved fast, like he didn't want to touch it for long. Sign and it's yours. The whole thing. What's left of the mission, the well, the land stretching down to the ravine. Nobody's claimed it in decades. You want to start fresh, rebuild somewhere quiet. Ain't quieter than the dead. Caleb hesitated. 3 months ago, he'd buried his wife Mary in a pine box outside their cabin. Fever came fast and cruel that spring, and when it left, it took half the town with it and everything Caleb had built. The house was cold now. Her things are still hanging on the hooks as if she'd come back any minute. But she wouldn't, and staying there felt like trying to breathe under dirt. He signed the paper. Now standing at the ruins, Caleb wondered if that choice had been a mistake. He spent the day taking stock, oak beams still strong in the support walls, chapel stones cut so clean you could slide a knife between them. He'd counted at least 40,000 bricks still intact. Enough to build a new house, maybe 2. But it wasn't the stone that kept him there past dark. It was the sense of something hidden. Beneath the chapel floor, the wooden boards were warped and dry, but they'd been laid atop stone, an odd choice for a building this old. He pried one up and found only dust. Then he stepped on the next board, and it gave. The sound was soft, like a sigh. He dropped to his knees and peeled the floor back with the claw of his hammer. There was a space beneath, a void where no light reached. Dust floated in the warm air rising from below. Then came the wind, not from outside, from within. It passed over his skin like the breath of someone watching him too closely. That night he slept by a fire just outside the ruins, the mission walls at his back. Dreams came, twisted, red light, iron doors, whispers that echoed like hollow bells. When he woke, the sun was already creeping across the valley floor, and he knew what he had to do. Now. Lantern in one hand, crowbar in the other, Caleb returned to the hole. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, just a bruised light along the edge of the horizon. The chapel was silent. He pulled up the loose boards. Beneath was a narrow stone stairwell chiseled directly into the earth. It led down into a darkness that didn't feel empty, it felt full. He hesitated only once. Then he descended. Each step was uneven, hand-carved, ancient. 10 steps in the light from above disappeared completely. 20 steps down the corridor leveled out. The air was thick, unmoving. His lantern flickered. The walls around him were smooth, but etched with faint carvings, lines, and circles intersecting like maps or constellations. Then he saw it. A massive iron door, black with rust, solid, seamless, welded shut from the inside. A crude cross had been scratched into the metal, not carved. Scratched like a warning made in haste. He placed his palm against the iron. It was still warm. He stayed there for a long moment, staring at that sealed door, the silence pressing down on him like weight. Then he turned back, climbed the stairs, and emerged into the morning sun, gasping like he'd been underwater. His hands were shaking. And for the first time since burying Mary, he didn't feel numb. He felt purpose. There was something down there, something that men had died protecting. Not gold, not relics, a system. As he packed up his wagon to head into town for supplies, ropes, oil chisels, dynamite if needed, he looked back at the ruin one last time. The chapel stood silent, but he thought he heard something echo from deep inside the earth. It sounds like singing, low, distant, and impossible. If there's hell under here, he muttered. Stepping into his saddle, I just bought the front porch. Caleb returns with tools. He begins clearing the passage deeper into the underground corridor. Inside, he finds burial niches, ancient bones, and remnants of a desperate last stand. The iron door wasn't meant to keep something out. It was meant to keep something in, and something is scratching behind the metal. The morning air hung heavy with the scent of sagebrush and sun-warmed dust. Caleb Morgan stood at the mouth of the stairwell, crowbar in one hand, lantern in the other, and rope slung over his shoulder. The birds had long since gone quiet. Even the wind, which usually whispered through the broken arches of the old mission, had stilled. It was the kind of silence that made your ears ring. He crouched low and lit the lantern with a match, shielding the tiny flame from the morning breeze. It caught with a low flicker, casting a circle of trembling gold against the stone. Then he descended. The temperature dropped with every step. 20 uneven stairs carved into sandstone, each slick with age. The corridor leveled out again, just as it had the day before, but this time Caleb came prepared. He paused in front of the iron door. Its surface was mottled with age, but the cross scratched into its center still looked angry, almost violent. The weld across the handle had been done in haste, sloppy lines of melted iron pinning it shut from the inside. He ran his fingers along the metal again. It wasn't warm this time, just dead and still. He set the lantern on the ground, braced the crowbar into the weld, and leaned into it. The metal groaned, protesting in deep guttural tones. He worked slowly, deliberately. First one corner peeled up, then another. Sweat beaded on his neck, dripping down the back of his shirt. His arms ached by the time the weld cracked clean, the sound like a bone snapping in a quiet room. The handle turned. He stepped back, breath caught in his throat. The door didn't budge. He leaned into it, shoulder to rusted metal, and with a groan of stone grinding against stone, the iron swung inward. Beyond the door, the corridor widened. His lantern's light spilled across smooth walls lined with stone niches, but these weren't just structural. They were burial alcoves. Some were empty. Others still cradled bundles wrapped in rotted linen, decayed bodies of men who had chosen to die down here. Franciscan friars. Their last act was sealing this door from the inside. Caleb swallowed hard. He knelt beside one alcove and touched the stone. A name had been carved beneath it, barely visible now: Padre Tomas Alvarez, 1765. Dust drifted in the air like smoke. He walked deeper into the hallway, the light from his lantern pushing back a darkness that seemed to breathe. Then he heard it. A sound so faint he thought he'd imagined it, like stone shifting underfoot, but he wasn't moving. He turned slowly. Nothing behind him. Nothing in front but more corridors. He pressed on. At the end of the hall, the space opened into a round chamber with a vaulted ceiling that stretched into shadow. The air smelled of dust age and something faintly metallic. Along the walls were carved religious scenes, but they weren't the usual depictions of saints or Christ. These were different. Figures in robes carrying objects that glinted in the lantern light. Ornate crosses, gold, chalices, scrolls. He stepped closer and ran his fingers along the carvings. The detail was astonishing, not crude at all. These hadn't been done by frightened men in a hurry. This was deliberate, careful. There were 12 robed figures in total, each one positioned in a different pose, each holding something unique. Then he noticed the floor. A circle had been cut into the stone at the center of the room. A seal of some kind filled in with plaster and worn smooth by time. He knelt beside it, brushing dust aside. In its center was another symbol, not a cross, but a shape made of interlocking circles. A wheel, just like the one he'd seen partially hidden in the mural upstairs. The pattern wasn't religious. It was mathematical. He stared at it, heart pounding. They didn't bury treasure down here, he whispered. They buried fear. A sudden gust of wind blew out his lantern. Complete darkness swallowed him. He froze, breath caught. No movement. No sound. Then a low creak from the corridor behind him. He lit another match with shaking hands. The spark flared bright, catching on the wick. He held the lantern up. The chamber was unchanged. But he was no longer alone. At the edge of the hallway, barely visible in the lamplight, something moved. A shadow. Not human. Then it was gone. He didn't wait to investigate. He backed out of the chamber, retracing his steps, eyes flicking to every dark corner as he moved. The lantern shook in his grip. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time and burst back into daylight lungs, sucking in air like he'd been drowning. The mission stood silent, golden in the morning light. He sat against the wall chest, heaving the cold iron of the crowbar still clenched in his hand. He didn't know what he'd seen, if he'd seen anything at all. But the fear in his chest wasn't leaving. It wasn't just the bones, or the silence, or the murals. It was the feeling that something was still down there, waiting, watching. He looked again at the lantern. Its glass was cracked. And at the very bottom, resting on the inside of the glass, was a single blackened fingerprint. Later that day, Caleb returned to the chapel and studied the mural again. This time with a fresh eye. He saw what he hadn't before. The map wasn't just a layout of the building. It showed something beneath corridors, chambers, connecting lines that stretched out like roots underground. The sealed vault he'd entered. Just one room. There were others. The wheel symbol appeared again near the bottom, this time surrounded by 12 markings in a ring. The same as the 12 figures carved into the vault walls. Each symbol is different. Each perhaps a separate site. A network, not of tunnels, of secrets. The fear the friars buried wasn't about one place, one treasure. It was systemic. They built it to last, and to never be found, until now. He touched the map again, and this time he understood. They hadn't died protecting gold. They'd died protecting a truth too dangerous to surface. And the moment he'd turned that iron handle, he'd let it loose. In the distance, thunder cracked low behind the mountains. Caleb turned toward the valley. Tomorrow he'd need supplies. Crowbars weren't going to cut it anymore. He needed rope, picks, oil, maybe even dynamite. And he needed to go deeper. Because what he'd found, it was just the beginning. A coin changes hands, and 3 men start closing in one of them, with a badge, one with a ledger, and one with blood on his boots. The coin was small, smaller than Caleb remembered. Barely the size of his thumbnail, but heavier than it looked. Gold had a way of feeling important, even when it tried to be discreet. He turned it over in his fingers as he walked into Arroyo Viejo, the morning sun glaring off the cracked dirt road. The mission lay several miles behind him, silent and brooding, under the desert sky. But its weight still pressed on him. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that sealed vault, those dead men in their linen wrappings, and the fingerprint in the lantern glass. He needed answers, or at least confirmation he wasn't losing his damn mind. The town was already stirring. Ranchers untying their horses from hitch posts, dust rising behind wagons headed east. A dog barked somewhere behind the saloon. Life moved on here like it always had. No one looked at him twice yet. Caleb stepped into Trent Assay and Appraisal, a cramped building wedged between the general store and the telegraph office. It smelled like sweat sulfur and old ink. Shelves were lined with scales, acid jars, and metal clamps. The walls yellowed from lamp smoke. Elijah Trent, thin as wire and twice as twitchy, looked up from behind a ledger. "Well now," he said, leaning forward. "If it ain't Caleb Morgan, heard you bought that old church pile from Everett." Caleb nodded, setting the coin gently on the counter. "Found this clearing rubble. Figured it might be Spanish." Elijah picked it up, squinting. "Huh. Colonial mint, all right. You see that bell stamp there?" He pointed with a stained fingernail. "That's early, real early. California missions, probably. Could be worth a fair bit to a collector." How much? Elijah rolled it between his fingers, weighing it. Gold contents nearly pure. Might fetch 75. 80 if the buyer's sentimental. "I'll take 50, Caleb said quickly before he could second-guess himself. Elijah raised an eyebrow, nodded, and ducked beneath the counter. He counted bills slowly, deliberately, then reached for his pen and opened a separate ledger, the one he didn't usually let people see. "Standard practice," he said without looking up. "Territorial regs. Gotta log pieces like this when they're that old. The government gets curious about where things come from." Caleb stiffened. "I thought you were discreet." "I am," Elijah replied, scribbling anyway. "But paperwork don't care." The moment the pen touched the page, Caleb knew it was a mistake. But backing out now would only make things worse. He pocketed the cash, nodded stiffly, and stepped out into the street. And that's when he heard it. 2 men talking just outside the general store. Their voices are casual but sharp. Marcus just bought a Spanish coin off some guy. Said it was damn pure. $75 easy. Caleb froze behind the post, his fingers tightening around the bills in his coat pocket. "Spanish," the second man said, interest sparking. From where Guy claimed he found it cleaning rubble out near Devil's Crossing. Could be more where that came from. Caleb didn't wait to hear the rest. He ducked into an alley, his breath shallow. In towns like these, gold whispers louder than God. That single coin had cracked the door open. Now the whole damn town would start listening. He hitched his horse and rode hard back to the mission, dust kicking up behind him like smoke from a gun barrel. By the time he arrived, the sun was low again. His shoulders ached. His hands stung from the reins. But worse, he wasn't alone. A polished black buggy stood just outside the mission walls, the kind used by bankers or lawyers. Caleb slowed, letting the horse trot quietly, and dismounted. Standing by the crumbling arch was Everett Sinclair, suit-pressed boots, gleaming hat, tipped low. He turned when Caleb approached, smiling like they were old friends, sharing a joke. "Afternoon," Caleb Sinclair said smoothly. "Heard you've been busy." Caleb didn't reply. Sinclair stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back. "I've been thinking about our deal. $100 for this place, quite the bargain. It was your offer." "It was," Sinclair agreed. "And now I'm wondering if maybe I understood the place. Word is you found something under all this mess." Caleb kept his tone neutral. "I'm salvaging timber. Found a few odds and ends. That's all." "Is that what Elijah Trent said?" Sinclair's voice lowered, eyes sharp. "Funny. He's not usually so talkative, but small towns make for loose tongues." "You sold it fair and legal," Caleb said. We shook hands. Sinclair gave a slow smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm a reasonable man, Caleb. Always open to renegotiation, especially when there's gold involved." Before Caleb could respond, the sound of approaching horses echoed across the valley. 3 riders emerged from the shimmering heat, 2 rough men with rifles and one wearing a badge. Sheriff Will Harlan dismounted slowly, dust clouding around his boots. His face was lined, sun-baked, unreadable. "Gentlemen," the sheriff said, tipping his hat. "Heard some talk in town about Spanish artifacts changing hands. Figured I'd ride out, see what all the excitement's about." Sinclair stepped in, extending his hand like they were old poker buddies. "Just discussing some property rights, Will. Caleb here's been finding more than just busted beams." The sheriff looked at Caleb. "Is that true?" Caleb hesitated, then said, "Found a coin while clearing debris. That's all. Mind if I take a look around?" "It's my land." "Sure is," Harlan said. "But if what you found qualifies as historical, it might be subject to territorial law, especially if it's from the Spanish era." Sinclair stepped closer. "We're talking about church relics here, Sheriff. Could be sacred, maybe even stolen. Lot of gray area in old land deals." Caleb's jaw tightened. The heat, the tension, the crawling sense that his discovery was slipping through his fingers, it all pressed in at once. He was still trying to calculate his next move when something caught his eye. A man in a dark suit standing silently near the ridge, half hidden behind a rock. Too well dressed for a rancher. Too still to be casual. And when Caleb looked directly at him, the man tipped his hat and disappeared behind the hill. Someone else was watching. The sheriff was still talking, but Caleb wasn't listening anymore. This was no longer about one coin. It was about control. Whatever lay beneath the mission had drawn attention like blood draws flies. He thought he'd found a quiet place to rebuild. What he'd actually found was a spark in a dry field. And fire was coming. A stranger arrives. Lucien Voss, bringing with him questions, danger, and an offer too tempting to refuse. Meanwhile, an old warning is whispered through the ruins by someone who knows its truth. Caleb first spotted the man at sunset. The mission ruins were cast in long shadows, orange light slashing across the sandstone walls. Caleb stood near the old chapel's doorway, brushing sand from a faded mosaic he'd uncovered when the silhouette appeared on the ridge, a solitary rider unmoving, watching. He didn't flinch when Caleb looked up. He just sat there, pale hat gleaming against the last light of day, his posture too calm, too straight. And then, as if satisfied, he turned his horse and vanished into the dying sun. An hour later, Caleb heard the hoofbeats again. By then, he had retreated to his small campfire behind the mission stew bubbling in a dented pot, his rifle propped beside a half-sawn timber. He didn't get many visitors out this far, at least not the kind who announced themselves. So when the rider returned this time, leading a fine black gelding and wearing a coat too clean for dust country, Caleb stood up slowly. The stranger dismounted like a man who expected the ground to wait for him. His boots gleamed. His gloves were supple leather. His voice, when it came, was smooth as polished wood. "Mr. Morgan, I presume?" Caleb didn't confirm. "And you are?" The man smiled. He didn't offer a hand. "My name is Lucien Voss. I represent a consortium of, let's say, interested parties. Word travels, Mr. Morgan, especially when gold changes hands." Caleb stiffened. "You're with Sinclair?" Voss chuckled. "God, no. Mr. Sinclair is a small-time opportunist with excellent shoes. I represent collectors with real interest in Spanish-era history. Artifacts, religious items, rare materials. Things I believe you may have recently unearthed." Caleb narrowed his eyes. "I sold a coin. That's it. And yet—" Voss turned slowly, taking in the chapel's battered frame, the fractured stone arch, the blackened bell tower. "This doesn't look like a salvage site. This looks like an excavation." "I'm not interested in selling," Caleb said. "Not yet," Voss replied. "But you will be, because you're smart enough to know what's buried here isn't just old metal and broken idols. It's something older, something hidden." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Do you know what the Franciscans really feared, Mr. Morgan? It wasn't heresy. It was exposure. They hid things because the church demanded secrecy, not safety. And this mission, it was a cornerstone." Caleb said nothing, but his hand drifted toward the rifle leaning against the timber. Voss raised an eyebrow, catching the movement. "I'm not here to rob you. I'm here to help you understand what you've found before others take it from you." Caleb didn't lower his guard. "And what exactly have I found?" Voss smiled again, but there was no warmth in it. "Something bigger than gold. A system. A legacy. One you've cracked open without fully realizing it." Then he tipped his hat and walked back toward his horse, mounting with graceful precision. "Think it over," he called. "When you're ready, I'll be at the Green Lantern Hotel in Arroyo Viejo. Room upstairs, corner window. I'll leave the lamp burning." He rode off into the dusk without another word. Later that night, as Caleb sat by the fire turning over the pieces in his mind, a soft crunch of boots in sand drew his attention. A young woman stood just beyond the firelight, wrapped in a woven shawl, her eyes reflecting the flames like glass. She looked maybe 22, 23, hair tied back, sharp cheekbones, skin like sun-warmed clay. "You shouldn't be here after dark," she said quietly. Caleb rose to his feet slowly. "You lost," she shook her head. "I came to warn you." He didn't move closer. "About what? The mission? The ground it's built on? The bones underneath?" Her voice was steady, like someone used to not being believed. "My name is Maria Delgado. My family's lived near here for 5 generations. Before that, this was Navajo land, sacred ground. The church didn't build here by chance. They built on top of what they couldn't destroy." Caleb frowned. "You know what's beneath it," Maria nodded. "There's more than one kind of death, Mr. Morgan. The kind that buries bodies, and the kind that buries truth. My grandfather used to say, the friars sealed themselves in not to protect gold, but to keep something else from getting out." Caleb sat back down, skeptical, but not dismissive, not after what he'd seen. Maria stepped closer and knelt, pulling something from her satchel. It was a stone shard worn smooth on one side. She turned it over, revealing an engraved symbol, 3 interlocking circles with lines branching like roots. He froze. He'd seen that symbol. On the vault floor. On the mural upstairs. They didn't design that, Maria said. That symbol is older than the church. Older than Spanish boots ever touched this land. She leaned in, voice low. And it doesn't point to treasure. It points to containment. Caleb stared at the shard. The lines on it weren't just decoration. They matched a portion of the hidden mural he'd been uncovering. That wasn't a coincidence. It was map work. You ever hear the old Franciscan story, she asked? 12 keepers, 12 vaults, all connected. If you open one, the others shift. If you open it all, you break the seal. Seal on what Maria didn't answer. She stood brushing sand from her knees. You think you're digging up history, but history's digging back. And then she left, vanishing into the night like smoke. The next morning, Caleb returned to the chapel alone. He studied the mural again. Looked harder. There, beneath the chipped plaster, where time and moisture had faded most of the colors, he saw another symbol. Faint. Nearly lost. The same 3 interlocking circles, and branching from them 12 faint lines, each marked with a different glyph. He hadn't just uncovered a vault. He'd triggered something. Maria had called them seals. Voss had called it a system. Caleb didn't know which terrified him more, but he knew this. If 12 sites existed, and this one was the first, then others would come looking. That afternoon, as he loaded supplies into his wagon, he saw dust rising on the horizon. Not one rider. 3. Sinclair, Sheriff Harlan, and someone else. Caleb adjusted the rifle at his side. The game had started. Caleb breaks through the sealed chamber and finds not just treasure, but a map encoded in symbols leading to a network of underground sites. But he's not the only one who sees it. The iron groaned like it was waking from a long, bitter sleep. Caleb braced his shoulder against the vault door, sweat streaking down his spine despite the cold underground air. He had been working at it for over an hour, carefully unwinding the final pieces of corroded weld with his crowbar and a hammer. The metal was thick, ancient, forged for permanence, but time had made it brittle. Just enough. A final wrenching snap echoed through the tunnel as the last piece gave way. He took a step back, heart pounding. Then he gripped the handle. It turned with a low, grinding protest, and the heavy door creaked open, revealing a dark corridor beyond. Lantern in one hand, he stepped inside. The temperature dropped immediately, a sudden heavy cold that wrapped around his chest like chains. The corridor ahead was lined with carved stone panels smoother than anything else in the mission ruins. His lantern's light flickered across the etchings, robed figures with solemn expressions, holding strange objects, chalices, scrolls, crosses, and something that looked disturbingly like keys made of bone. The deeper he walked, the more the carvings changed. The religious motifs twisted. The figures no longer faced upward in prayer, they were turned inward, surrounding a circle of interlocking rings. Beneath their feet were flames, or roots, or veins. Caleb couldn't tell. Then the corridor opened into a vast circular chamber, and for a moment he forgot how to breathe. The room was larger than the chapel above. Its domed ceiling vanished into darkness, but its stone walls were lined with alcoves, each one sealed with carved slabs. In the center stood a raised platform, and on it a wooden chest blackened with age and wrapped in what remained of rotted silk. Dust hung in the air like fog. He approached slowly. Around the base of the platform, more symbols were carved into the stone. Those same 3 interlocking rings he'd seen before, and only now, each ring contained additional markings, arrows, circles, tiny glyphs that could be stars or maps. He knelt and brushed away a layer of grime with his shirt sleeve, then whispered, "There's no turning back once you open a dead man's door." He undid the latch on the chest. It snapped easily. Inside was a crown. But not a king's crown, no jewels, no ornate spires. It was ceremonial, gold with green stones set into the rim like eyes. The craftsmanship was precise, almost surgical. He didn't dare lift it, just stared, the weight of centuries pressing on his chest. Next to it was a bundle wrapped in waxed cloth. He pulled it free carefully, unrolling it across the platform. Manuscripts. Dozens of sheets written in dense looping script. Spanish, but old. And beneath the ink diagrams, the same interlocking ring symbol drawn again and again, each with different attachments. Arrows pointing to small glyphs that might represent locations, or traps, or warnings. He flipped a page and found a sketch of the mission grounds. The layout matched perfectly Chapel Well Watchtower. But beneath it, carved clearly, was a network of tunnels spreading out in all directions like roots from a tree. The corridor he'd entered, it was only one. This place was the center, the beginning. 12 other lines snaked out from it, each ending in another structure, another symbol, another vault. Caleb sat back on his heels. The friars hadn't just hidden gold. They'd built a system. A chain of sealed sites all connected, and he had just broken the first link. The manuscript pages suddenly felt hot in his hands. He climbed back up, emerging into the light just as the sun broke over the hills. The mission walls glowed orange in the morning sun, but Caleb's thoughts were already racing ahead. The cipher, the mural, the crown. This wasn't about salvage anymore. This wasn't even about gold. This was a map, one that led to something massive, maybe dangerous. As he crossed the broken tiles of the chapel, something glittered near his feet. He bent down and picked up a coin, small gold, ancient. It must have fallen from the chest and caught in the folds of his coat. He stared at it for a long second before slipping it into his pocket. Just one. One coin. No one would miss it. Later that day, he rode back into Arroyo Viejo manuscript, locked in a crate under the wagon seat. He kept his face calm, movements casual, but his blood was still buzzing with what he'd seen. Inside the assay office, Elijah Trent greeted him with a thin smile. "You again," he said. Looking to sell, Caleb pulled the coin from his coat pocket and set it on the scale. "Just this." Elijah raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He examined it through a magnifying glass, muttering to himself. Same era. Better condition. Real clean strike. He turned it over. Still colonial. "Where are you finding these clearing rubble?" Caleb said. "Probably dropped by travelers." "I'm not planning a treasure hunt." Elijah jotted something in his ledger. Caleb counted out the bills and turned to leave, only to pause as 2 men stepped through the front door. He recognized neither. But one was clean-shaven in a dusty gray suit. The other had the sharp, narrow look of someone who never paid for a drink in his life. And both were watching him far too closely. He left quickly. Outside, the town looked the same, but it felt different, quieter. He passed the saloon and caught a glimpse of movement in an upstairs window. A shadow. Then gone. He didn't wait. He climbed into the wagon and took the long road back. That night, he barely made it through his campfire supper. Too many eyes. Too many whispers. and one question that gnawed at his nerves. What happens when someone else sees that map? Because the moment they do, Sinclair, the sheriff, Voss, or worse, everything changes. Caleb needed time, but time was running out. He returned to the chapel the next morning, half expecting the place to be crawling with strangers. But it wasn't. It was Maria. She stood in the shadow of the altar, brushing dust from the mural with her shawl. Her expression was solemn, reverent. When she turned to him, she held something in her hand, a stone shard. Not just a relic, a key. She laid it next to the mural and pointed at a matching glyph. "They're not just vaults," she said. "They're locks. And you just picked the first one." Sheriff Harlan arrives with questions, and not just from the law. Sinclair brings pressure. Voss brings muscle. And someone starts digging just not where Caleb expects. The sound of hooves came before the dust. Caleb stood at the edge of the mission's broken well, hand resting on the revolver at his hip as 3 riders appeared through the morning haze. One was the sheriff. The others were muscle-tough, quiet, and packing rifles they didn't bother hiding. None of them looked like they were here to talk about scripture. Sheriff Will Harlan was first to dismount. He moved slowly, deliberate, like a man trained to control the room without raising his voice. "You've been busy, Morgan," he said, dusting his hat. "Mind if we talk?" Caleb didn't answer at first. His eyes lingered on the 2 others. Both stayed on horseback, watching the ruins like wolves near a wounded deer. "What's this about towns buzzing?" Harlan replied, walking past him without waiting for permission. "People saying you've found something under this old place. Valuable. Historic. Dangerous, depending on who you ask. I didn't realize rumors were part of territorial law." Harlan stopped just inside the chapel. The morning light filtered through the open roof, illuminating the cracked altar and the worn mural behind it. "You sell a colonial coin to Trent, that's one thing," he said. "You sell another, a day later, identical, make pure gold that raises flags. I got folks from Santa Fe already sniffing. Claims of cultural significance, possible violations of preservation code. Hell, even the bishop's office sent a letter." Caleb let out a breath. "All from one damn coin." Harlan turned gaze steady. "In towns like these, gold whispers louder than God." He said it without judgment, just fact. Then he stepped closer. His voice dropped. "I don't care about coins, but I do care about what comes with him, men like Voss. He showed up last night. Didn't even ask for a room key. Just walked into the Green Lantern like he owned it." Caleb didn't flinch, but the name landed heavy. "Who is he?" he asked. "Trouble," Harlan said. "The kind that wears gloves so he doesn't get blood on his hands." He gestured toward the open ruin. "You planning to let him dig up the past? Or you got something worth protecting here?" Caleb didn't answer. He didn't need to. That afternoon, Everett Sinclair arrived with a bottle of wine and a grin as fake as the silver chain on his vest. "Thought I'd stop by, check in, be neighborly." Caleb was crouched near the mural, scraping away another layer of grime. He didn't look up. "Funny. You didn't strike me as the friendly type." "Maybe I'm feeling generous," Sinclair said, setting the bottle on a broken pillar. "Or maybe I'm realizing we both made a mistake. I undervalued this place. You misunderstood the weight of what's under it." He leaned in. "I've got friends with real resources, Caleb. They can help you move what you've found. Quietly. Cleanly. You'll get your share. No noise, no vultures." Caleb met his gaze, calm and sharp. "Are you offering help or giving a warning?" Same difference. That evening, Caleb sat with Maria beside the fire, the cipher manuscript between them. She ran her finger along the glyphs, her brow furrowed. These symbols, she said, they aren't just coordinates. They're conditions. He leaned in. Conditions, she nodded. Look here, this one translates loosely to gathering of wind. Could mean high elevation. This one red earth where the sun burns twice, that's desert. These are environmental keys. The friars didn't just hide the sites, they camouflaged them. Caleb stared into the fire. 12 vaults, 12 disguises, and only one master key, Maria said, lifting the shard again. Caleb held up the manuscript. This, he said, isn't just a guide. It's bait. It leads to something bigger. But it also marks you. Maria looked at him. What do you mean? Caleb tossed a twig into the fire. It crackled, then curled into ash. Every step I take deeper into this, someone else follows. First Sinclair, then Harlan, now Voss. I'm not the only one tracking this map. Maria's voice dropped. You think Voss has his own copy? No. Caleb said, but he has something worse, curiosity and men with guns. That night, as stars bled across the sky, Caleb heard movement near the western edge of the mission wall. He rose quietly, revolver in hand, and crept through the rubble. He found footprints, fresh, deep. Someone had been digging, but not in the chapel, near the old orchard where the map showed nothing. He crouched near the disturbed soil, heart thumping. Whoever it was had moved quickly, rough, looking for something but not careful, not informed, a failed guess, or a distraction. At dawn, he rode into town. He tied off the horse behind the livery, took the back alley, and slipped into the Green Lantern Hotel through the side entrance. Lucien Voss was exactly where Harlan said he'd be, corner room curtain open, just enough to cast suspicion. Caleb knocked once and entered without waiting. Voss sat in a leather chair, sipping coffee like he'd been expecting him. Mr. Morgan, he said smoothly, glad to see you survived the sheriff's visit. Caleb closed the door behind him. You send someone to dig near the orchard? Voss didn't blink. I have men looking in many places. Can't rely on one source, can we? Caleb crossed his arms. I have the map. The real one. You want access, you come through me. Voss set his cup down. Do I? Yeah, Caleb said. Because this isn't gold we're talking about anymore. It's a system, a locked one. I've got the cipher, and I'm the only one learning how to read it. Voss stood slowly. His tone didn't change, but something colder entered his eyes. Then you'd best be careful where you leave it. Caleb turned to leave. One more thing, Voss added. Caleb stopped at the door. If you ever try to deceive me, Voss said, you'll find out how many graves are buried beneath this town and how many I've already filled. Caleb didn't respond. He stepped into the hallway and walked out into the morning light, jaw tight. The game had changed. You think gold's the prize, he thought bitterly. No, it's bait. Caleb visits Father Benedict Quinn, an aging priest who once knew the secrets of the mission. What he reveals will change everything Caleb thought he understood and unlock the truth behind the 12. Father Benedict Quinn lived in a stone cottage on the outskirts of Arroyo Viejo, where the road gave up trying and let the desert take over. The man was nearly 80 by town, gossip older by rumor, and said to be one of the last Franciscan priests who still remembered the old missions, not from stories, but from scars. Caleb rode out just after sunrise, before the streets filled with questions and long looks. He had the manuscript wrapped in cloth inside his saddlebag, and a bottle of rye tucked in for good measure. Some men wouldn't talk without incentive. Others wouldn't talk unless you gave them something to remind them they were still alive. The cottage sat crooked under the slope of a dead ridge surrounded by wind-warped trees and silent air. Caleb knocked once. No answer. He knocked again. Finally, the door opened. A tall man with sun-bleached robes and a weathered face stood framed by dust and shadow. His white beard looked like it had been carved from the desert itself, and his eyes, milky and one sharp in the other, locked on Caleb with unsettling clarity. "You're not here for confession," Father Quinn said. "No, sir." "Good. I don't do that anymore." He opened the door wider. "But I do pour coffee." They sat inside near a small hearth, a pot of something black and bitter between them. The walls were lined with old books, religious icons, and dust thicker than any sermon. Quinn moved slow but steady, his limbs long and lean like old lumber. Caleb unwrapped the manuscript on the table between them. "I found this beneath the mission ruins," he said, "under a sealed vault, with a crown and a map." Quinn didn't touch it. He didn't even look surprised. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and let out a slow, dry breath. "You opened the gate." Caleb tensed. "You know what it is, I know what it was meant to be," the priest said. "But what it became, that's another matter." Caleb pointed to the three-ring symbol drawn repeatedly through the pages. This showed up on the floor, on the walls, even on a stone Maria Delgado gave me. "What does it mean?" Quinn's gaze drifted toward the window, like he was watching something distant and heavy. "It's not a symbol," he said finally. "It's a seal." Caleb waited. The Franciscan order, Quinn continued, did more than spread the word of God. They cataloged, they recorded, they were preserved. When the Spanish crown began losing its grip on the Americas, they were ordered to consolidate the church's treasures, gold relics, texts, maps. But not all of it was meant to be kept. Caleb frowned. "What do you mean?" "Some knowledge was dangerous," Quinn said. "Ideas, histories, heresies. The church feared them. So the friars created a system, a network of hidden vaults across the territory. 12 in total, each one locked by design, each one watched by who Quinn's one good eye sharpened, by those who understood the cost of unlocking them." Caleb glanced at the manuscript. "So this cipher isn't just a map," No Quinn said. "It's a trigger. Once one vault opens, the others begin to shift. You've started something, Mr. Morgan, something that can't be stopped, only guided." Caleb leaned forward, voice low. "What's inside them?" Quinn shook his head. "I don't know them all, but I know the final one, the 13th, was never marked. Only the others point to it, and only the cipher decodes their meaning." Caleb's chest tightened. "The center." "The end," Quinn corrected. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the ticking of a warped clock and the settling of the hearth's coals. Finally, Caleb said, "There are people coming, Sinclair, Voss, even the sheriff's in deep now. They want what's buried. They won't understand it," Quinn said. "Not truly. They'll think it's gold, power, control. But what they're really chasing is corruption. Knowledge that was never meant for common hands." Caleb stood, anger rising. "Then why leave a map at all? Why not burn it? Seal it forever?" Quinn looked up at him with something like sorrow in his face. "Because faith dies in silence," he said. "But secrets scream through stone." Caleb left before noon. The sun was already high and mean when he rode back toward the mission, his thoughts louder than the wind. If Quinn was right, then the map was more than just directions, it was a chain reaction. And he'd lit the fuse. Maria was waiting for him near the chapel, standing beside the mural, her shawl pulled tight against the heat. "Did he tell you what you needed?" she asked. Caleb nodded. "He told me what I didn't want to hear." He joined her by the wall, the stone still warm from morning light. The carved lines they'd traced now looked different, less like paths, more like locks, each waiting for the right shape to break them open. "Lucien Voss will move soon," Maria said. "He has men watching the town, the trails. He's not here to be my partner." "I know." She looked at him. "So what's the plan?" Caleb touched the three-ring seal etched into the mural's edge. "I show them what they want to see," he said, "while I follow what they don't." He stepped back, scanning the full mural again. "There's a vault nearby, one day's ride, maybe less. If the map's right, it's the first connection to the others. And the others, they'll follow. Just far enough behind to stay dangerous." That night under the stars, Caleb sat by the fire, going over the manuscript again. One of the drawings, a crude map, showed a canyon he recognized. A natural bottleneck. Easily defensible. Easily escapable. Perfect for misdirection. He marked the page and folded it gently. 12 vaults. 12 locks. And a 13th no one could see. With Voss, Sinclair, and Harlan circling, Caleb leads them to the first satellite site hidden in Devil's Canyon. But when betrayal comes, it doesn't come from the enemy he expected. Dust rose behind Caleb's wagon, like smoke off a slow-burning fire. The trail to Devil's Canyon was narrow and winding, flanked by scrub and broken rock. Maria rode ahead on her mule, silent eyes always moving. She didn't ask questions, not anymore. She knew as well as he did, everyone following them was already too close. By mid-morning, they'd reached the canyon rim. The land dropped suddenly into a wide scar of red stone and shadow. Below, narrow paths twisted like veins between jagged cliffs. It was the kind of place where one wrong step could bury a man for good, and the kind of place a smart man would use as a trap. Maria dismounted and pointed across the ravine. "That ridge. The glyph in the manuscript matches the shape of those 3 spires." Caleb followed her gaze. The rock formations were exact. More than coincidence. The friars hadn't just hidden vaults. They'd embedded them into nature like camouflage. "Are you ready for this?" Maria asked. "No," Caleb said, "but I know we're out of time." They set up camp near the canyon mouth. The wind was dry, sharp, carrying heat like blades. Caleb took out the manuscript and laid it on a flat stone. The page marked with the glyph had faded since he'd first traced it. But the meaning was still clear. This place held something, maybe a key, maybe just another layer of the puzzle. He studied the route into the canyon again, then glanced toward the horizon. 3 riders. Coming fast. Voss, Sinclair, Sheriff Harlan. Right on cue. The confrontation came before noon. The riders dismounted without a word. Voss looked perfectly rested. Sinclair was already sweating through his collar. Harlan's face was unreadable, but his hand lingered near the revolver on his hip. "Hell of a view," Sinclair said, nodding at the canyon. "You always lead treasure hunts through scenic routes." Caleb didn't smile. "You wanted proof. This is the first of the 12. The friars buried more than coins, more than crosses. They buried a system. You're standing at the doorway." Voss stepped forward, eyes flicking to the manuscript Caleb rolled out over a stone. "The glyphs match," he murmured. "Topography, elevation, it fits." "Exactly," Caleb said. "But getting to the vault won't be easy. It's not just hidden, it's protected. And the only reason you're seeing this is because I've chosen to show it." Voss's expression stayed cold, calculating. A gesture of trust. A warning, Caleb replied. Sheriff Harlan scanned the cliffs. I see narrow paths, loose rock, and a whole lot of places to fall. You sure this isn't suicide with a map? That's why I'm going first, Caleb said. Sinclair scoffed. You expect us to just wait up here while you disappear into the rocks with the treasure? I expect you to follow, Caleb said. But stay close and stay slow. One wrong step out here and the canyon keeps you. He turned and began the descent, Maria behind him. The others followed, some reluctantly, some eagerly, all armed. The path twisted tighter the farther they went. At times they had to pass single file hugging the cliffside while the wind tugged at their coats. Caleb counted steps, watched the sun's position. After an hour, they reached a narrow shelf where the canyon wall opened into a cleft in the rock. It looked like erosion natural, but Caleb saw the edges. Too straight, too measured. He stepped inside. The air turned cooler immediately. The chamber within was shallow but precise, its walls carved with the same pattern of 3 interlocking rings. In the center sat a stone slab, half buried under dirt and roots. He cleared it with his hands, revealing a seal etched with the same design from the mission mural. But something was wrong. The outer ring was cracked. Maria saw it first. Someone's been here. Caleb leaned in. Scratches. Fresh. Boot prints. Sinclair pushed past. So where's the gold? Voss didn't move. He stared at the slab, then at the glyph carved into the wall. His expression changed. Not greed, not victory, recognition. He knelt beside the glyph, brushing dust away. Caleb joined him. What is it? Voss pointed to one of the small markings at the edge of the design. It's not just a vault, he said. It's a nexus. A convergence point. According to the cipher, each of the 12 vaults contains part of a master key. This one site, it's a link. That means whatever's below it connects more than just treasure. Caleb felt the heat drain from his chest. The 13th site. Voss nodded slowly. This chamber isn't about hiding something. It's about guiding someone. They returned to the surface just as the light began to shift orange. The mood was different now. Heavier. No one spoke much. Even Sinclair seemed subdued, his earlier bluster replaced by something closer to reverence or fear. That night, around the campfire, Caleb kept the manuscript close. Maria sat beside him, silent, thoughtful. You believe him? She finally asked. I believe he believes it, Caleb said. She looked at the fire. What do you see in that chamber? A warning, Caleb said. But they saw a map. Across the fire, Voss stared into the flames. Expression unreadable. Sinclair was already snoring half-drunk on whatever bottle he'd brought. Harlan sat alone at the edge of camp, cleaning his revolver, like it was the only thing he trusted. None of them noticed Caleb slip the cipher pages into a second pouch. None of them pulled Maria draw a duplicate of the canyon glyph on a fresh piece of hide. They were already looking ahead, which meant they wouldn't see what was coming next. Because Caleb had found something else in that canyon. A passage. Narrow, low, sealed with a stone engraved in Navajo, not Spanish. A passage not on the map. And whatever it led to, they weren't ready. A deadly ambush in Devil's Canyon leaves the group fractured. Loyalties shatter and Maria is taken. Caleb must choose between exposing the cipher or sacrificing someone he can't afford to lose. The shot rang out before sunrise. It echoed through the canyon like thunder, cracking off bones, snapping Caleb from sleep before his eyes even opened. By the time he reached for his revolver, chaos had already begun. Ambush. Sheriff Harlan shouted, his voice cutting through the dark. Shadows moved fast between the rocks, 5, maybe 6 men, dressed in desert rags and wrapped faces. They weren't bandits. They moved with precision, purpose. They weren't there to steal. They were there to take. Caleb ducked behind the wagon just as a second shot cracked past his head. He caught a glimpse of Voss kneeling beside a boulder, firing methodically. Sinclair was nowhere to be seen, typical. Another flash of movement, and then Maria's scream. He turned in time to see her being dragged down the side path, two figures holding her by the arms, moving with brutal speed toward the lower canyon trail. Caleb lunged forward, but a bullet clipped the rock near his feet, forcing him back. "They're taking her!" he shouted. Voss didn't hesitate. He tossed Caleb his rifle. "Go." Caleb didn't wait. He ran. Down the narrow trail, every breath of fire in his chest. He followed the dust trail boots sliding on loose stone. The attackers had a head start, but he knew this canyon, knew the turns, knew the drop-offs, and he knew something they didn't. There was no easy way out. Maria fought like hell. She twisted, kicked, bit. One captor stumbled. She nearly got free, but the second drove a fist into her ribs and hauled her upright again. "You don't know what you're doing," she gasped. The man said nothing. His face was hidden, but she saw the ink on his hand, a glyph. The same interlocking rings, but warped, wrong. These weren't treasure hunters. They were protectors, or zealots, or both. They stopped near a collapsed cave mouth. One pulled aside a curtain of brush, revealing an opening barely wide enough to crawl through. The man shoved her inside. Then they were gone. The stone swallowed her whole. Caleb found the tracks 10 minutes later. He knelt by the brush, heart-hammering knuckles white around his rifle. The passage was narrow, steep, and black. He didn't hesitate. He slid inside. The air shifted as he crawled, cooler, damper, touched by something ancient. He dropped into a hollow chamber lit faintly by his lantern, and there carved into the wall was something he hadn't seen before. A variant of the cipher, cruder, rough cut, but unmistakable, and beneath it a warning etched in both Spanish and Navajo. "What you seek is not lost. It is sealed for your sake, not its own." He swallowed hard and kept moving. Maria sat with her back against the cave wall, arms bound, breathing shallow. But her eyes were sharp, tracking every sound. Footsteps, not boots, bare feet. She looked up and froze. A woman entered the chamber robed in rough cloth, face marked with paint. Mid-40s, hard eyes, quiet rage. "I know who you are," she said in accented English. "You don't," Maria said calmly. "You're breaking the seals, opening what should remain closed. The blood of those buried here will not rest if disturbed." Maria stared at her down. "Then why not kill me?" The woman knelt. "Because you carry knowledge, and we need to know how far it's spread." Caleb moved faster now, following the sound of water somewhere ahead, a trickling stream. The tunnel opened into a cavern wide and circular, with a shallow spring at its center. Light spilled from a crack in the stone ceiling, illuminating another mural. This one was different, less Spanish, more tribal. It showed the interlocking rings again, but this time they were breaking apart, and from the gaps between them spilled fire. Snakes, hands. Beneath it all, a face neither human nor beast. Caleb stepped back, and that's when the first attacker lunged from the shadows. The fight was fast, vicious. Caleb blocked the blade with his forearm, punched low, drove his shoulder into the attacker's ribs. The man was strong, but Caleb was furious. 2 hits later, the attacker dropped. Caleb turned and saw Maria standing behind the woman, with the painted face a shard of stone clutched in her bloody hand. "I bought us 10 seconds," she said. Move! They ran. Back at the surface, the camp was wrecked. One horse is gone. Supplies scattered. Sinclair emerged from behind a rock, shaken but untouched. Jesus, he muttered. I thought we were all dead. Voss stood at the canyon edge, arms crossed, face unreadable. Who were they? Caleb demanded. Voss turned slowly. The original wardens. The ones left behind to protect the seals. Not to guard them, but to keep them from ever being found. Maria leaned against a rock, catching her breath. Then why didn't they just destroy the cipher? Because they're not just guarding treasure, Voss said. They're guarding belief. That night, Caleb sat alone by the fire. The wind whispered through the canyon like a voice half forgotten. He pulled the manuscript from his satchel and unwrapped the page with the altered cipher, the one he'd found in the hidden chamber. And he saw it. A new mark. Something that hadn't been there before. A shift in the rings, as if the map itself were responding. Maria joined him, eyes fixed on the fire. They know we're moving faster now, she said. Then we slow down. She shook her head. No. We get smarter. Caleb looked at the cipher, then at the canyon beyond. We're not just opening vaults anymore, he said. We're waking something up. A clue in the modified cipher leads Caleb and Maria to a ghost town lost in a salt flat, once the site of a massacre. There, secrets buried by both the church and the land begin to rise again. The salt wind came in sharp and dry, biting the edges of Caleb's coat as he rode across the cracked white basin. Ahead, a ghost town waited, half buried in dust, scorched by sun, forgotten by maps. Its name had been lost, erased deliberately. Only ruins remained, a crumbling chapel, sagging timber homes, and a collapsed well choked with sand and salt. Maria rode beside him, her eyes locked on the chapel. This place wasn't built, she said. It was erased. Caleb nodded, jaw tight. The altered cipher from the canyon had led them here. A spiral etched beneath the 3 rings, matching the shape of the old salt basin. It had been a town once prosperous, rumored to hold a sub-mission of the main site, until it was emptied. Quietly. Brutally. He dismounted and stepped onto the dry ground. His boots crunched like glass. Places like this don't die, he muttered. They're buried alive. Inside the chapel, sunlight streamed through holes in the roof, casting broken shapes on the floor. Pews had long since been stripped or rotted away. The altar stood alone, its base cracked from fire damage. The walls were blackened with soot, but beneath it all, hidden in the char, were faint lines. Maria knelt and wiped away dust, revealing more of the pattern. The rings again. But this time open, unsealed. And below them dozens of smaller symbols, names. Caleb crouched beside her, reading one aloud. Father Antonio Leon. Maria's eyes narrowed. He was in the original mission ledger. He disappeared during the Salt Massacre. The what? She looked up. The church covered it. Locals knew. Soldiers swept through the town said they were chasing heretics. But it wasn't a purge. It was a burial. They weren't removing people. They were sealing something in. Caleb stood and began circling the altar. Something in the room felt off, a wrong kind of silence, like the building was holding its breath. His boot struck hollow wood. He knelt. A hidden hatch. He opened it, revealing a dark stairwell spiraling down into the earth. They lit lanterns and descended into the deep. The staircase ended in a crypt, small dry walls covered in faded scripture. At its center stood a stone basin filled with hardened salt. In it, bones, not laid to rest, throne. Caleb stepped closer and saw it just beneath the salt, a seal etched into the basin's floor. The 3 rings again, but this time a 4th line encircled them, like a cage. Maria whispered they didn't seal treasure down here. No, Caleb said. They sealed a man. She pointed to the wall. Faint etchings formed a passage. He who unlocked the 13th bore no crown, but spoke with many tongues. The silence he shattered shall not rise again. Caleb stared at the words, heart pounding. Someone tried to open the 13th sight. Maria looked at him, the fear plain now, and they paid for it. When they emerged, the sky had turned. Clouds gathered at the edge of the horizon, unnatural and fast, like something heavy was coming with them. Caleb scanned the chapel one last time. He could feel it in his chest now. This place hadn't been a town. It had been a test site, an early experiment to break the seal, and it failed. Not because the cipher was incomplete, but because the consequences weren't understood. He stepped outside and stopped. A horse was missing. Maria saw it too. They turned too late. Sinclair stepped from behind the collapsed stable, holding a rifle low at his side. Didn't take much to follow, he said, voice too calm. You two made just enough tracks. Maria stepped forward. What do you want, Everett? The truth, Sinclair said. But I'll settle for the map. Caleb narrowed his eyes. Voss send you? Sinclair laughed. Voss is waiting to see who survives. Me, I'm done waiting. I've got men posted behind you, so don't think about running. Caleb reached slowly into his coat. Sinclair cocked the rifle. Easy, he warned. Caleb pulled out the manuscript and held it up. You want this? I do. Caleb tossed it into the dirt between them. Sinclair stepped forward cautiously. That's when the crypt door behind them slammed shut. All eyes turned. The chapel trembled. From beneath the earth, a low pulsing hum began to rise. It wasn't sound, it was pressure. Caleb whispered, You broke the seal. Maria stepped back. No. He opened the wrong one. Sinclair froze, staring at the chapel door. Then the first scream tore through the air. One of Sinclair's men stumbled from behind the church, clutching his face, blood pouring from his ears. Another emerged blind, howling before collapsing into salt and silence. The hum grew louder. Caleb grabbed Maria's arm. Run! They didn't look back. Not until they reached the edge of the basin, horses wild beneath them. From the ridge, they saw the town again, or what was left of it. The chapel had collapsed inward. Smoke rose not black, but white, like steam, like breath. Whatever had been sleeping down there had stirred. And it remembered. That night, camped miles away, Caleb held the damaged cipher in his lap. The symbols had shifted again. The 4th ring now glowed faintly with a hidden etching, barely visible before now clear an eye. Maria pointed. That wasn't there before. No, Caleb whispered, but it is now. She looked at him. What does it mean? Caleb's voice was flat, cold. It means something's watching us back. Caleb and Maria seek refuge with an old cartographer who once helped decode the original seals. There, the full scope of the church's cover-up begins to emerge, and the final location starts to reveal itself. A cold wind swept down from the mountains as Caleb and Maria approached the old railway cabin. It sat crooked in the hills above Placitas, half swallowed by pine and thyme. The path was narrow, nearly erased by overgrowth, but the coordinates were exact. The modified cipher from the salt basin had led them here encoded into the fourth ring just beneath the eye symbol. Maria glanced at the lantern Caleb held. "Are you sure he's still alive? If he isn't," Caleb said, "then we're out of maps." They reached the front porch. Caleb knocked 3 times. No answer. He knocked again. A metallic clink behind the door. Then, "Name your sin." The voice was dry, old, but steady. Caleb didn't hesitate. Pride. The latch clicked. The door creaked open. Wendell Avery was nearly blind in one eye, but he saw more than most men with 2. An old cartographer and former Jesuit translator, he'd once been tasked with redrawing Spanish mission boundaries for Vatican archives. Instead, he uncovered fragments of the sealed codex, the original set of maps the church buried, then tried to forget. "You found the spiral," he said, settling into a creaking chair. "I told them it would resurface." He sipped whiskey from a chipped tin mug and waved toward a table stacked with brittle maps and scraps of parchment. "Show me what you brought." Caleb laid the manuscript open beside the lantern. Wendell leaned close, tracing the fourth ring with a gnarled finger. "You broke the silent ring," he murmured. "Most never get past the third." Maria sat across from him. "We didn't break it. Something broke it for us." Wendell looked up sharply. "Then it's begun, what Caleb asked." Wendell turned the manuscript toward them, pointing to the eye. "This isn't just a mark, it's an activation, a signal. The 13th seal doesn't just require keys, it requires awakening. You've triggered the sequence." He stood, walked to a cluttered shelf, and pulled down an ancient scroll wrapped in faded blue cloth. He unrolled it carefully, revealing a map covered in faded ink rings and radiating lines. This, he said, was the original overlay, the full design, 12 rings each connected. But the center. He pointed to a blank space in the middle. No one ever mapped the 13th. Caleb leaned in. Why, Wendell tapped the blank with a shaky finger. "Because it's not where the 13th is, it's when." A heavy silence filled the room. "What do you mean when?" Maria asked. "The 13th site isn't fixed. It shifts. A moving point accessible only when the other 12 are aligned, not physically, but through unlocking intention." Wendell turned back to the cipher. "Every vault you've found, every symbol you've read, they've been guiding your thoughts, shaping your perception. You're not just following a trail, Caleb. You're being conditioned." Caleb felt something hollow open in his chest. Conditioned for what? To become a key. They stayed that night, curled near the hearth, while wind howled across the hills. Maria lay awake, watching Caleb stare at the fire. "You okay?" she whispered. He shook his head. "No." She waited. "I thought this was about gold. Then I thought it was about secrets. Then, justice." He looked at her eyes, dark. "But now I don't know what this is. And that scares the hell out of me." She moved closer, resting a hand on his. "It's still about something real," she said. "Because we're still choosing what we do next." Before dawn, Wendell gave Caleb a compass. Not just any compass. Its face was cracked and its needle spun slowly, even when still. But etched into the side were the same glyphs from the manuscript, 3 rings, and now the eye. This belonged to a man named Lucero, Wendell said. He was the last one to reach the 12th vault, but he never returned. Caleb took the compass. "It'll point you toward what's left of him." Wendell gave Maria a second gift, a piece of obsidian carved with the same spiral symbol. "When the ground shifts," he said, "this will heat. You'll know you're close." He paused at the doorway, silhouetted against the pale blue morning. "One more thing," he said. "If you reach the 13th, remember you're not the only ones the map has been guiding." As they rode out, the mountains behind them turned gold in the morning sun. Caleb glanced at the compass in his palm. The needle had stopped spinning, and it was pointing south. Maria looked at him. "Toward the mesa, no," he said. "Beyond it." He checked the manuscript again. A new pattern had emerged around the eye, 12 radiating arcs converging at a central point. The alignment had begun. Maria squinted toward the horizon. "We're close, aren't we?" Caleb nodded. "Closer than we've ever been." She asked, "Then what's left?" He looked down at the compass, then back at the fading trail. "We found the final vault," he said. "We finish what Lucero couldn't." And under his breath he added, "But we do it our way." Caleb and Maria race against Voss and Sinclair to the final vault hidden in the desert's shifting rock formations. As the seals begin to realign, the 13th finally reveals itself, and it's nothing they were prepared for. The desert did not welcome trespassers. Caleb felt it with every step through the crimson sands of Red Hollow, each gust of wind like a warning, each shifting rock beneath his boots, whispering, "Not yet." But the compass no longer spun. It pointed straight ahead, unwavering its cracked glass, catching glints of light that weren't coming from the sun. Beside him, Maria adjusted the strap on her satchel, the obsidian shard now pulsing warm against her chest. The 13th was near. She didn't need to say it, he felt it too. A weight in the air. The pressure of too many truths buried too deep for too long. Behind them, Voss and Sinclair trailed at a distance, no longer hiding their pursuit. The race was over. This was the endgame. The cliffs opened ahead, revealing a narrow slot canyon chiseled by time and silence. At its heart, half swallowed by the earth, stood a monolithic door, circular, seamless, carved into the stone wall like it had been grown, not built. 12 rings encircled it, and in the center, newly exposed by wind and erosion, the eye. The 13th seal. Caleb stepped forward and placed his hand on the center ring. It turned beneath his palm like clockwork. A pulse ran through the canyon. The air changed. Not colder, not hotter, older. The door slid open without sound. Darkness breathed out from the void beyond. They entered, Caleb and Maria side by side. No hesitation. Inside the chamber was wide and domed, the walls carved with symbols from every language they'd encountered along their journey. Latin, Spanish, Navajo, Aramaic, even dialects no one living could name. They spiraled inward toward a single platform in the center of the room where something sat cradled in stone, a book. Unbound, endless, glowing faintly from within. The manuscript of Lucero. Maria whispered, "It's not gold. It's not power." "No," Caleb said. "It's a memory." He stepped closer. As he did, the book responded, turning pages, slowly stopping, at a passage written in his own hand. But he'd never written it. Not yet. Maria read it over his shoulder. To open the final seal is not to uncover the past, but to accept its weight and choose what not to carry forward. They understood. This wasn't a vault of treasure. It was a mirror. A reflection of humanity's hunger, its faith, its cruelty, its hope. Every sealed vault, every cipher, every buried truth had been placed not to hide knowledge, but to test the wisdom of those who found it. Behind them, boots echoed on stone. Voss and Sinclair emerged into the chamber. The former's eyes widened. The latter simply whispered, What is this? Caleb turned, voice calm. It's a ledger of everything we chose to forget. Every sin scrubbed from the record. Every truth is too dangerous to be useful. Voss stepped closer. Then we use it, expose it, leverage it. Caleb shook his head. No, we don't weaponize the past. We learn from it, or we bury ourselves with it. Sinclair hesitated. Voss raised his revolver. But Maria moved first. She stepped between them and placed the obsidian shard onto the book. The eye closed, the light dimmed, and the book turned to ash. Voss screamed, rushing forward, but the floor beneath him shifted. The chamber began to quake. The rings on the wall spun in reverse, sealing again. Caleb grabbed Maria's hand. "We've done what we came to do," he said. They ran. They reached the canyon mouth just as the stone door behind them sealed forever. Voss and Sinclair didn't follow. They never would. The earth had taken back its secrets. Later at the edge of town, Caleb and Maria sat beside an old well that hadn't held water in decades. The sky above was wide and clean. Stars blinked without judgment. Maria broke the silence. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. He pulled out the broken compass. The needle no longer moved. He set it on the well's edge. "I think we passed the test," he said. "Not because we found the truth, but because we didn't try to own it." She nodded slowly. "So what now?" Caleb looked out across the desert, where history slept under miles of dust, and the wind told stories to no one. "Now we write our own stories," he said, "without erasing the ones that came before." They left Arroyo Viejo at sunrise. No fanfare, no gold, no monuments, just silence and peace and the promise that some truths are sacred not because they're hidden, but because they teach us how to live without turning everything we touch into something to conquer. Not everything buried is meant to be found. Some things wait to see if we're ready not to possess them, but to leave them be. Final entry in the reconstructed cipher.